Hello, welcome to Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I am Robert, the narrator, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Confessions. This will be episode 9, our DnD Grognards the Grognardiest of them all. That is what this episode is about. That's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. But first, I just want to, talk about my gaming as of late. And that also is one of the reasons I decided to talk about this issue in my gaming. So I think the last time that we talked many months ago, my friends and I were in a situation where we were running 4 session campaigns. We had 3 or 4 different game masters in our group at the time, and no one seemed to want to settle on a particular game. So what we went ahead and did is decided that each game master would run a game for 4 weeks at a time, and we would try to decide if that was the game that we were going to go with. So we did that for several weeks. I think we did it for somewhere in the range of a 16-week period, and we kind of got tired of that process. I know I did. For example, I like a more stable, ongoing campaign. And nowadays, I was a little different in my earlier years, but now I really like a stable campaign. So I decided to put forth the idea that, hey, let's just go ahead and pick. And so we did, and we kind of put it up to a vote for the entire group of some of the games that we had already run. And the winner was one of my longtime friends who was running a D&D homebrew. He had kind of put together his own ideas along with the ideas of a couple of OSR, old school Renaissance D&D systems, and he wanted to run that, and that's what won all most of the or the majority of the votes, and we started to play that. Now, in my recent history of gaming, we have always had this dynamic where generally my core group of friends that I role play with, there's usually 3 total game masters, myself and 2 other friends of mine. And, not to brag or not to criticize the other game masters in our group, but I am, I think, by a mile the most versatile of the game masters in our group as far as what genres I'm willing to run and what systems I'm willing to use. One of my friends in our group who acts as GM sometimes literally only runs one system, that's the hero system. And my other friend, who is a game master, really only enjoys running fantasy, and very, 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 very heavily leans towards Dungeons and Dragons. So that has, as long as I can remember, I have always known that when I'm not running, I essentially have 2 options, and that is fantasy, usually some variation of D&D, or the hero system. So when I'm not running, I pretty much know what I'm going to be playing, and it's been that way for really as long as I can remember. We've had periodically, we have more friends that don't always game with us, and other GMs among them, and some of them heavily lean towards Dungeons and Dragons. So it's always a circumstance where when I'm not running, there is pretty much zero variety for me. And so weeks ago, when the decision was made that we were going to do a twist on D&D, old school Renaissance game, I told my friends, you know what? This has pretty much been the status quo for a while, and before I'm old and gray, or older and grayer, I want to go out and actually have an opportunity to play in games that aren't fantasy, or isn't Dungeons and Dragons, or isn't the hero system. So I was going to commit to 8 weeks for the campaign, which is plenty of time usually for our group. And then I was probably going to be looking for another game. I wound up playing my friend's D&D game for 12 weeks, and then as I said, I moved on to another system. So long story short, too late. That is what made me think of this episode, or approaching this issue. Are D&D Grognards the Grognardiest of them all? So what is a grognard? I guess I should explain that in case you're not familiar with the term. Well, a grognard is a phrase that was coined years ago, and its original meaning was a role player, a D&D player in particular, who only liked to play earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm assuming that was any edition before 3rd edition. But I think that the definition, or at least in my mind, the definition has been expanded to encompass any gamer of any type of system that is older, or earlier versions of that particular gaming system, if it has multiple editions. So any gamer who has no interest in playing modern games only plays older games. In my mind, at least, Grognard has branched out to mean that, but originally, and I think a lot of people think of a Grognard as someone who only likes old school Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what I've been thinking, given my experience, not just with my core group of friends that I role play with, and then the circle just outside of them of friends, and then all of the other gaming I've done with strangers. It seems to me that there are two types of gamers. There is the gamer who never gets tired of playing Dungeons and Dragons, or the gamer who will not play at all. And it seems like I don't know if I said that correctly, but the gamer who will play Dungeons and Dragons, and the gamers who won't. And the gamers who will play Dungeons and Dragons seem to never tire of playing it. As I was saying, one of the friends in my group who runs Dungeons and Dragons literally plays for years, has shown no signs in growing tired of playing Dungeons and Dragons, plays or runs multiple Dungeons and Dragons a game a week, and I guess I have to honestly say shows no interest in wanting to play anything else, and tends to be the reason why our group stops running or playing other games, because we have as we have gotten older in the hobby, are the number of friends who can commit to an ongoing game has shrunk smaller and smaller. So if we have someone in our group who really doesn't want to play a system, they tend to have a lot of sway, because if we lose one person, sometimes our group is a little hindered. So it's weird to me that of all of my gaming for the last 20 years, it seems that those are the two types of gamers that I've come across. Either the person plays D&D and never grows tired of it, or doesn't play Dungeons and Dragons at all. And I guess I kind of understand that, Dungeons and Dragons being the system that started it all, the unwavering loyalty to it, I guess, is a little bit understandable, but still strange to me. I don't tout myself as the most versatile person in the world, a Renaissance man who explores every aspect of gaming, but I still find it hard to believe that someone can get into the hobby and kind of be satisfied with the same experience mechanically and genre-wise over and over and over again. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. So, but outside of the guys or players that I've played with who seem to be open to playing Dungeons and Dragons and never grow tired of it, I do have friends who won't play Dungeons and Dragons, the other side of the equation. And generally, the reason they won't play Dungeons and Dragons is because of the murder hobo history of the game. Dungeons and Dragons, of course, was the first role-playing game made, and it started the hobby, and I think may have a well-deserved murder hobo history, where the focus of Dungeons and Dragons has always kind of been killing things and taking their stuff, and not much else. I don't think the sentence has ever been said, "Hey guys, I want to do some role playing, and I really want to have deep backgrounds and great role playing and great character interaction. Why don't we play Dungeons and Dragons?" I don't think that sentence has ever been said in the history of D&D. So to a certain point, I think that Dungeons and Dragons history of attracting or only being about killing things and taking their stuff could be slightly well deserved. But of course, I am a firm believer that you can take any role-playing game and put your spin on it to make the kind of game that you want to play, whether it is character and interaction and role-playing focused, or if it's combat focused. I think you can take any role-playing game and make it your own. Of course, there are some that give you the tools for what you want to do better than others, but there is no reason why you can't play Dungeons and Dragons and have it be about background and characterization and good RP. But that being said, I am not tired of Dungeons and Dragons because of the murder hobo nature of it, which I'm going to be 100% honest with you. My group of friends tends to fit that description. But I'm just tired of Dungeons and Dragons because of the mechanics. Dungeons and Dragons was the second role-playing game that I played 20 plus years ago, and rolling a d20 and adding a number to it, I've been there. I've done that. So I'm kind of to the point right now where what else is there? It's 2016 and we are still playing games and using mechanics that started the hobby many years ago. What else is out there? So I can stomach the murder hobo nature of Dungeons and Dragons. It's the mechanics that I'm really tired of, and the fantasy genre may be a very close second as to what has made me want to move on from playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't understand players who can only play one system for years. That has amazed me. When I was younger and a little bit earlier in the role playing hobby, I loved jumping from system to system to system. Is something that became a joke in our group. You can always tell when I wanted to move on to another game, because what I would do is, if I was running, or even if someone else was running, I would come to game night and whip out a rule book for a system that I wanted to try, but we weren't playing at the time, and just thumb through it. I may say, "Hey, check out this new rule book," and everybody knew what that meant, and it became a joke. When Rob whips out the rule book for another game, that means he wants to change up the game. And I really was into switching up games, but as I've gotten older, my campaigns have tended to last a lot longer. I've actually wanted to go away from jumping from system to system. I think when you become older and time is not your own, jumping from system to system to system is not as exciting, because it's hard to schedule things. Your time is not your own, so it becomes more important to you for your campaigns to last longer, because maybe you get more out of them instead of frantically jumping from game to game to game. And that being said, though I like a longer campaign, it baffles me that folks can draw excitement out of using the same old mechanic, or running in the same old genre, or playing the same old campaign. I mean, I over the last few years, I've run a Numenera campaign that lasted for 18 weeks. I think that was fantastic. I've run an Earth Dawn campaign that lasted for 16 to 18 weeks. So I'm willing to play the same campaign, but playing the same system for multiple years with zero interest in experiencing any other system, it seems weird to me. And I think my theory on why I feel the way that I do, and why players who can play the same system over and over and over and over and over again and never become tired of it, is because I think I draw interest from all aspects of role playing. That includes mechanics, that includes RP, that includes setting. So all of those things are important to me. If I have to play the same old mechanic, roll a d20 and add a number to it, that I lose interest in that, because I've seen that before. I've been doing that for 20 plus years. Give me something else. Or if you're throwing the same setting at me, I tend to lose interest. If I'm not getting enough role playing, I tend to lose interest. And I think that is fairly unique. I think that there are a lot of people out there who doesn't need all of those things to have a lot of variety or variation to it. I think a lot of folks hold one of those things or two of those things as more important than the other or others. And I think there are a lot of role players out there, and I think I play with a couple of them in my group, who like role playing games despite the mechanics. It's like, I think their feeling is, man, role playing would be awesome if it wasn't for these mechanics. So they can be completely happy with a cookie cutter same-ish experience of no disrespect of D&D, or actually any game that's all they play or want to play for year after year after year, because mechanics isn't that important to them. Maybe they get their kicks out of just playing the fantasy genre, or just killing things and taking their stuff no matter what mechanics they use to do it. So I think that I may have to mark that off as one of the reasons why some folks can, no matter what the system is, be it D&D or anything else, like I said, that definition of grognard, and at least in my mind, has expanded out to any player who doesn't want to play anything other than older, non-modern games. They just like one aspect of role-playing, be it mechanics or role-playing or setting, and not all of them. They don't need all of those things to be clicking to enjoy the game, but I do. I love mechanics. I love RP. I love setting. And if it's going to be the same thing time after time after time, I quickly lose interest. And I think that's a good point. Another aspect to this, which I find really interesting, I don't know if anyone else has thought of this, along the lines of our DnD Grognards, the Grognardiest of them all. I've already mentioned that, of course, obviously D&D was the first role-playing game. And I've mentioned that folks don't necessarily draw their interest from every aspect of role-playing games. The other thing that's very interesting to me is it seems that Dungeons and Dragons game designers seem to always make D&D rule systems that draw a lot away from Dungeons and Dragons. I've noticed that a lot of game designers, when they left TSR, or when they leave Wizards of the Coast, they tend to make systems that draw heavily from Dungeons and Dragons or draw a lot from the tropes. So I think that grognardness, if that's a word, it is, because I just made it up. Kind of is reinforced by the game designers, and I don't know if that's the case because the game designers themselves are grognards, or maybe these are professionals in the industry who make a heavy amount of their, or a great deal of their income from role-playing games. So hey, stick with the best. If maybe the odds are in your favor as a game designer, if you're going to have a game that leans heavily on recognizable mechanics like Dungeons and Dragons, especially if that is paying your bills, why experiment with something that no one knows? Or are they the lead grognards of our hobby? I think that's very interesting. Like Robert Schwalb, his Demon Lord game draws heavily. It's heavily from Dungeons and Dragons. Monty Cook's Numenera draws heavily from Dungeons and Dragons. Rob Henslow and his Fifth Age, I think it is, or Fourth Age role-playing game draws heavily from Dungeons and Dragons. So all of these former Dungeons and Dragons designers, they go on to do their own work and stay with the Dungeons and Dragons system. So is that an economic choice because Dungeons and Dragons is the big boy on the block, or are they super grognards? That's an interesting question to me. This episode, I don't want to say that I have answers, but please let me know what you think about this in the comments if you can, if you have any ideas, because it seems to me that the fact that Dungeons and Dragons was the first, the fact that I think folks can get away with enjoying role-playing games for one aspect as opposed to all of the aspects, and the fact that Dungeons and Dragon game designers, professional game designers themselves, seem to never want to leave Dungeons and Dragons it all makes me feel like, yeah, maybe Dungeons and Dragons Grognards are the grognardiest of them all. Let me know what you think about that. That's a very interesting question. I mean, I definitely have some friends who are completely fine with only running one system and it not being Dungeons and Dragons. But man, there's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players out there, and they can play it over and over and over again and not thirst for any other type of experience, which is really interesting to me. Something else that has popped into my head earlier. I was talking about murder hobos, the players who play Dungeons and Dragons, who have kind of given Dungeons and Dragons the reputation of being a game where role players, all they care about is combat and killing things and taking their stuff. One interesting point that I want to make, and I'm going to bring this up when I do one of my other episodes, but I just wanted to touch on the murder hobo idea here. Something that's very interesting to me, and I want to examine maybe in a later episode, is I've played a lot of 5th edition, and what makes me really, really love 5th edition is the bonds and flaws aspect that they added to the game, which gives characters a lot of depth, a lot of opportunity for role playing, and really powers there. I believe the inspiration mechanic, I believe it's called, where you get action points for playing your character in an appropriate way. I've noticed that none of the GMs that I role play with use the bonds and flaws mechanic. So it's interesting to me of what came first, the murder hobo reputation or the murder hobo. Because I'll just say that right now, 5th edition really gives D&D players, I don't think there's been any other edition that would allow the murder hobo reputation of D&D players to be put aside like 5th edition, and in my experience they're not doing it. So I don't know, that's very interesting, something that I want to explore later. So I think that's everything that I have for this episode number 9, our D&D Grognards the Grognardiest of them all. And in my mind, I think I've answered my question. But what do you think? Do you think that there is no Grognard like a D&D Grognard? Let me know in the comments. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I love to hear from you. Love to hear your opinion. Am I being too hard on D&D players, or are there any games out there that you love that you can play all the time and never have to pick up another system? Let me know in the comments, and hope to see you for another episode of Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. And good night or good evening wherever you are. Thanks a lot.